Okay, so my name is Tim, I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to Path Through the Programme, a 10-part survey of various aspects of the AA programme with a couple of different formats designed to appeal to both AAs and Al-Anons, or indeed anyone using the 12 steps. We're ordinary members of the fellowship and we don't speak for AA or Al-Anon. We hope you find our experience helpful. The format of this session is as follows. Harry and I will speak between us for about half an hour on a topic. As we are speaking, you're encouraged to write any questions you have on slips of paper. Paper and pens will be distributed. Our assistants, Alistair and John, will collect these during the meeting. We will then select questions and, if we can, address them by sharing our experience. The session will last 50 minutes in total. The session is being recorded. Recordings will be made available online over the next few days at a member's personal blog site, which is not affiliated with AA. The QR code and site address are available here on the front table. Let's start with a few moments of silent prayer to use as you wish. Thank you. This session's topic is applying the programme to work, and Harry is going to kick us off.
Hey everyone, I'm Harry and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi Harry.
I'm also a member of Al-Anon and relevant for this session, a complete and utter toe rag in relation to work. Not just work problems. I occasionally have a problem with my boss, but like fractally absolute crazy in relation to work is what I've come to see. And as Tom, my friend Tom says, silly Billy. I'm very much a silly Billy in relation to work. So the most helpful person in recovery for me who I haven't actually met, like someone I don't actually know, is a guy called Bob B. He has some really, really helpful tapes on steps 6 and 7. And the first time I listened to him, he seemed to explain something about my work world. He seemed to put it in a way that I hadn't really heard people that I knew talking about it. And he used two phrases. One of the phrases was, he interviewed very well. And another one was that he never finished anything. And if I look at if I'd just been unemployed and unemployable, that would be one thing. But the truth of it was, on paper, I looked very, very, very good. Good degree. I didn't actually study. I just crammed and I sort of somehow managed to get a degree out of it and it looked good. And then I got a very good job straight out of uni. And then I went on to get other jobs, a director before I was 30, partner before, shortly afterwards. On one occasion I got a job. I got 3 promotions in my first 3 months. So that's one side of it, and that's the bit you'll get on LinkedIn. And then there's the other side of it, which is unemployed for multiple years in between those gigs, gently being asked if it was maybe time for me to move on and find something else. That position where I got multiple promotions in a short period, I remember so I ended up like number 3 in the organisation, of quite a large organisation, and someone seen to me said, "How do you do it?" And I said, "I never let anything slip." And the hands were so tight on everything. And of course, how long did that last for? I was suicidal within 6 months. And so I had a lot of stuff going for me. I used to work with someone, and I understood this phrase sort of at the time, and it wasn't until afterwards I could see it was so true about myself. He said when he was younger, he had all the right furniture, but it was in the wrong places. And that's exactly how I was. And coming into AA and getting sober and going through the steps once did not sort that out for me. I was so wrong on every single level, I couldn't even see how crazy I was. When I was about a year into recovery, I called my sponsor and I said, and I'd prepared the question very carefully, I'd thought it through, I'd put it through the inventory, good boy, read the big book. And I prepared the question, and the question for my sponsor was, sincerely, should I enter into a legal partnership with people who are currently on bail for fraud? And the response came, well, I can't tell you what to do, but maybe sometimes the answer's in the question. There's a few complex things going on here. And it all came to a head at 4 years into recovery. I got to the point where the thought of opening another job, the thought of opening my email was causing me to have actual suicidal thoughts. If I thought, if I have to do one more task, I'm going to kill myself. And of course, 4 years sober, I eventually actually get honest about the work situation, what actually is going on with work. And I want to say it was one magical thing that someone said, but as with everything that's occurred really in recovery, it was about actually bringing this problem to the program, not waiting for a quick fix, that one thing, or for God to just come and intervene and it was just going to be okay, or waiting for things to just blow over and it was going to get fine by itself. That isn't what happened for me. So a process of bringing it to the program, steps 1, 2, and 3 afresh, and then step 4, to look at, if my work is making me want to jump out of a window, that counts as resentment. I don't like the way things are in the world, and my body is having a reaction to it. I need to put it through the mechanism of looking at resentments. What are the stories I'm telling about my work life? What are the crazy attitudes I have? So, for example, I actually looked at what my actual attitudes were. A core one was that my bosses should not be able to direct how I do my work. That's a crazy thought, right? I don't want anyone else to see my work, to evaluate it, or to give me any feedback. That was one of the there was a core belief. And another one was I should be free to do whatever I like, whenever I like, and people should pay me regardless. That was another belief I absolutely had. So the first thing was to see how crazy that was and to share that with people, to get that out in the open. And after that comes some corrective measures. But and then to identify, character defects are a very good way of summarizing all the crazy and getting it into an actual way that we can actually see what's going on. So character defects, what are the defects here? I didn't like it to hear it. It took about 20 minutes for it actually to sink in, but someone said, ask God to remove your laziness. I'm like, lazy? I'm up at 6 a.m. I'm doing so much stuff every day. And the truth was I wasn't doing the stuff I was supposed to be doing. I'm not actually, and that comes hand in hand with irresponsibility. I'm not actually doing the things that I'm supposed to be responsible for, and I'm actually not I'm not being a good custodian of my material life. God's given me some delegated responsibility and authority. I wasn't looking after my affairs properly. Multiple years of unemployment. I get to a point with a job where it would all get too much, and I think, well, I just need to take a couple of years off now. I'm 36. I need to have 2 years off I don't know what I thought I was going to do, but. So defects, and then looking at some replacement ideas, some crucial replacement ideas. I think one of the most useful things that I did was I went through various bits of literature around the traditions and the concepts. And I went through them and I was told to go through them and extract all the principles as they relate to work and to doing things for others. And I came up with a lot of content. I couldn't tell you exactly what things specifically, but for example, one thing that's has been helpful to me in the last week, an idea from the concepts is that to be effective, you have to have matched responsibility and authority. And when I looked at my work situations, quite often I would take on loads of responsibility, or I'd try and get authority, but I'd never be responsible for it, or I'd have responsibility and I'd hamstring myself because I wouldn't be able to do anything about it. And I'd get into these horrible work situations where I'd come home crying, and I was always baffled by it. So the traditions and concepts gave me a really practical way to actually start sorting this stuff out. So in terms of what happened in the change, asking God repeatedly every day to remove this laziness and irresponsibility, and to remind myself these mistakes, none of the stuff was new, right? None of the problems I've had in recovery are new, really. They're all very, very old. I think everything that was in display as being a partner in a tax consultancy was on display with my first paper round. It really was. On my first paper round, I did a week of shadowing all the boys to learn how to deliver all the papers. On my first day, I delivered all the papers to the wrong addresses, and I got my nan to call them and tell them he wouldn't be coming back, and that was the end of that job. That was my first professional golden parachute. So the reason I say all that is because these defects of character, they've been around for a long time. I need God's help to remove them. I mean, if it's obvious and fixable myself, I would have done it already. So I needed God's help. And I had a little mantra that I read every morning. If my whole life is devoted to God, it doesn't matter to me personally what I do, for whom, and when. And it took a long time for that actually to become a really active working part of my day. But that is what happened in terms of, if my bosses want me to do something and it's correct and it's not, not way out of line, I need to just get on with doing it. If the phone rings and someone's asking for help and I have capacity to help them, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. Like, the toilet's broken, well, I guess it's my job to fix the toilet. It's like, it's not above my pay grade. It's just, is it indicated in appropriate? So that was very helpful. An absolutely transformed attitude that my job was to be useful to others and then to practically try and apply that, not thinking about what I was getting out of it, and a removal of the status piece, just simply doing the work in front of me. I had to... I started... One of the things about quitting work was that I'd become... the reason I could get so many promotions was I was working way too much. I was in the office on Sundays. Very important that I was there so I could somehow get ahead. And if I was really honest with myself, and this is an Al-Anon thing, I didn't really have any hobbies or anything interesting outside of work. I really didn't. So a crucial thing was to start to institute like basic bulkheads around work. So I work for the hours I'm contracted to work. I'm not a job's worth. I'm not inflexible about that. There's some flexibility. But once work's done, it's done. There are way more important other things to be getting on with in life. And I don't think it's everyone, but I did a little, I did some work on, okay, if I looked at my actual priorities in life, what are they? So if you looked at how much time work took up in my mind and how important it seemed, you would have said it was probably number one. Even at the times I wasn't really working, it seemed very, very important, this work-life thing. And when I worked it all out, work came in at number 7. I had recovery in my relationship with a higher power, my health, my husband and our home life, my family and my friends, all the stuff that I had sole responsibility for, like my finances and all that kind of stuff, that came in before the work stuff. And to remind myself of where that priority was of work. And also a shifting to, I had the view, and it started at school, if I didn't get an A, it wasn't worth doing. And the same thing was carried into work. Like, everything had to be amazing and perfect and praiseworthy to be worth doing at all. And so actually resetting the standard for my work these days is adequate. Like, to do adequate work and then to submit it and then for nobody to say anything, what would that be like? So these were some main shifts. And what's happened as a result of that is that I've been in my current role for 2 years, which is the longest I've had a job as an adult in a single position. And I think it might be the longest I've been in employment without having a period of unemployment. Absolutely astonishing. I don't quit a job unless I've got another job to go to. Miracle. And in that time, I've been useful. I haven't caused drama. I've done some things adequately. Occasionally, my task list slips behind, and I get into. So I can feel myself starting to panic and thinking I need to run from this situation. But it's actually about bringing things back gently. Okay, let's get back on track. What are the priorities and getting on with them? So those are the main things, and I'm going to wrap up in a minute. But I wanted to say, I've had a slightly different experience. So that's how it's been for 2 years, having had that the process of being changed by the steps. But something very, very new has happened recently. I've been unwell for a while, and I've had very little energy. And I was put in a situation. I was interviewing for a new role. I was kind of invited to be interviewed for a new role. And I don't have to take it. It's just like it seemed sensible and prudent to go through the process. And I got to the point where they wanted to do a work trial. They invited me in for a 3-day work trial where they'd set me a series of very complex tasks. I would also have to meet loads of new people, which is the worst thing in the world. And they would be watching me continually for the entire period. And I was at my lowest point in terms of my energy levels. But it was booked in well in advance. And as it approached, what well, firstly, I wanted to run, but it was like, leave it until the last moment that you can make a decision. And on the day before, I thought, well, if I practice what I've been taught to do, I don't have to worry about outcomes. I just have to show up and do the next right thing. You can always go to the trial, and then you can leave the trial if it's not going very well. So I turned up on the first day and had this curious experience of, because I had so little energy, I could only think about the thing in front of me. Mm-hmm. And there's this phrase that goes around, which is, I was reduced to working the actual program. Mm-hmm. So I turned up on the first day and I smiled at people and I said, what would you like me to do? And they said, well, we want you to do that first, and then we want you to do that. And I went over into that room and I did that task and I did it adequately. And I went over there and I did that task and I did it adequately. Someone asked me a question, I answered it honestly. Someone smiled at me, I smiled back. And I just did that for 3 days. And it was the most peaceful, easy 3 days of work I think I've ever had in my life. And it was brought about because I had no capacity to be thinking about myself, what other people thought of me, to be in the past, in the future. I was literally, for 3 days, by force, I was forced to be in the present moment. And the reflection post that is, I think part of the reason I'm ill and have become ill is because I've been fretting an awful lot about things. And I've been doing a lot of things, and I'm being a very good boy with work. I think a lot of it has been on my own power. And the shift that I've seen in that 3-day experience is all very new and current and like in flux. But what I'm shifting to now, and it's been even at this convention, is I'm staying in the present moment and relying on God to provide the words and the energy to do each thing. And I feel absolutely fine and at peace nearly all the time. So I don't know really what the outcome of that's going to be, but that's all I've got. Thanks.
Thank you. So, Tim, Alcoholic, and Al-Anon. Now, what I'm going to start with it. I don't want this to be a sob story, but what I want to do is to present a little bit about what made me the way I was initially, which I think is necessary to describe what happened with work. When I was 7, my family moved from London to a little village in Dorset where we were in the big house behind the hedge, and whoever lived in the big house behind the hedge was hated by the rest of the village. So we were ostracised by the village. There was no contact between my parents and the people in the village. I certainly didn't have any contact with the children except to be bullied by them. I didn't have any friends. I didn't have any friends until I was 14 and went away to school. When I was 11, my brother committed suicide. My mother had a breakdown. And my sister also had a breakdown and developed psychosis. And in the midst of all of this, relatives helpfully told me, if you do well at school, it will take your mother's pain away. This was not a subliminal message. Those were the actual words. Later on, there was more bullying. I was sexualized by someone older at an age that shouldn't have happened. A lot of stuff happened, which meant that by the time I started drinking, I was a little bit edgy, shall we say. And I was something of a performing monkey when I was growing up. I was put on stage to do things, which I did. And when I then got to an age where I was in the workplace, I conceived of work solely as a means for receiving sufficient adulation, praise, validation, whatever you want to call it, to offset all of this stuff that had happened in my childhood. That I was okay despite all of this. But as Sondheim says, a slotted spoon doesn't hold much soup. So whatever was poured in the top in terms of love, respect, validation, just ran out the bottom. And it was rather like an addiction in that one needs more and more and more to get less and less of an effect. You know, a couple of beers when you're 14 sends you to the moon. When you're 20, it takes a whole bottle of vodka and you get as far as Hastings. The moon is no longer the destination. And I misused work. I had no idea what the purpose of work really was. But I misused it as a way for creating an alternative identity. So I didn't have to face anything. And by the time I got to my late 20s, this needing more and more, the more I needed was more excitement, more stress, more challenge. And I got to a point in the late 90s, early 2000s, where I was a few years sober. I was the finance director of one of the dot-coms. We were burning through £250,000 of other people's money every month. I remember a day where I literally had to call around a bunch of rich people that we had contacts with to ask them to wire us £200,000 so that we could pay the salaries at 5 p.m. That's a stressful situation. And the tragedy of these sorts of situations is I could do it. If I hadn't been able to do it, I would have been fine. The problem is that I could. And I was able to make the call and wangle £200,000 out of someone's pocket. Because that kept me in the game. Having enough money to keep putting money onto the table in the casino, whatever is keeping you in the game is going to kill you. I eventually broke down pretty catastrophically at this point, and I had to reassess, to reapproach the whole question, firstly, of my childhood, and secondly, of work. And I remember the moment of surrender when I was standing in my kitchen and I said to the higher power, I literally don't care what you're going to have me do for the rest of my life. Just keep me occupied with something. I don't care what it is. And that's when the healing started, when I no longer sought work as some kind of compensatory mechanism. With all of that childhood stuff, now, in a sense, I was on the right track in that I needed to, as it were, create a different person. Because all of that stuff I was holding as my identity. I remember when I was drinking, it wouldn't be long into a drinking conversation with a complete stranger in a bar before the story came out. And I don't say that stuff much these days about my childhood, but occasionally it's relevant. In this context, I think it's relevant. The new identity was not that of performer. That wasn't what needed to happen. My big question when I was growing up was, who am I? What am I here for? But particularly, who am I? It's the great sort of war cry of the 15-year-old, trying to find out who... I know I had, sexual orientation questions, I had gender questions, there were all sorts of things going on in there as well. Who am I was the question. And I was so identified with all of that childhood horror. The way out of it is, in my case, I think very unconventional in the modern world. I needed to tell of it, as Mary Oliver talks about, just tell it. So I told it. I forgave. I made amends. But then something needed to come in its place. So I didn't heal myself of any of those things. I needed to create the conditions in which healing was possible. And healing is an automatic spiritual process, in my view, which takes place if the right conditions are created and I don't interfere with the process. So, first of all, as I said earlier, cutting away this sense of this barrier between me and other people by telling about it, and particularly sponsoring literally hundreds of people over the decades. You have people coming to you with every single problem that you had and thought made you unique, and you tell of your story, and then you hear your own story told back to you so many times, you realise you've healed. You didn't realise until the story gets told back in a particular way. And you realise you are no longer in the place that this person currently is. And you look at this person who's been traumatised, and you realise that they are not the trauma. And in seeing that they are not the trauma that happened to them, and that whatever it is literally over, I recognise my own past was over. My own trauma was over. Now, I kept thinking I'd have to keep going back and nagging at this stuff from the past again and again and again and again and again. I didn't. What I needed to do was to, as I say, create a new identity, but not by me designing a new identity. I'm going to become this in the world. You know that dreadful question, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Or what do you want to be when you grow up? A friend of mine, his best friend at school, they were 16, and they were at a posh boarding school, and they brought in one of these careers advisors, and this would have been in around 1976. And the careers advisor was going around the room saying to people, what do you want to, where do you see yourself? What do you want to become? What career do you want to have? My friend's friend said, I'm 16. I'm supposed to be running along the street with a hoop and a stick. Why are you asking me this ridiculous question? So I had to learn I wasn't that traumatised person. That person that suffered was not who I was and was not who I was meant to be. Point number one. Point number two, I did not have to figure out who I was. So I dropped all of the questions of identity around, there are lots of labels these days, and if I have to fill out a form, I know which boxes to tick. I dither still over some of them, frankly, but I can fill out the boxes, but that's the only purpose. I've ceased to see myself as a collection of superficial labels, and it's all become much more fluid. I'm not to be pinned down. I'm to discover who I am. And the discovery of who I am has been through a very bizarre process. And it's the process of... C.S. Lewis talks in one of his essays about the inner ring, this desire to be in the inner circle, the cognoscenti, the people on the inside, the people on the fast track, the people in the know, the movers and the shakers, the people with the power, the people with the adulation. And he said, you get inside there, you realise it's empty, there's nothing there, it'll be ashes in your mouth. He said, what you really want to do is become a good craftsman. Just do each small task well. Grow where you're planted. He says about himself that in saying, what is God's will for me? Well, he had a history with English language and literature and philosophy, and he found himself in Oxford. So it was a pretty good chance that God's will for him was to do something in Oxford in relation to English literature and philosophy. Very straightforward. There's no mystery there. So what I've learned to do over the last 20-odd years, more than 20 years since that breakdown, was to do what's in front of me. And I don't have an identity now. Other people may have an idea, but it's irrelevant to me. Who I am is something which I will have become when the whole show is over. But I need not concern myself with that. One small task at a time. Do it well, even though no one is looking. And each of those tasks, it's as though the spiritual surgery of steps 4 through 9 cut away the cancerous growths which were produced by my childhood, but left this vacuum which needed to be filled with something, and it got filled cell by cell by cell with each small action in AA, each small action in workplaces, each small action with my family, and a new body gets grown, and that's who I am. But I can't, it's like humility, that you can't talk about your own humility. You can't talk about your own pain. As soon as you're talking about your pain, you can't do it because you can't feel it and talk about it at the same time. You start to talk about it and the pain goes because you're now in the headspace of talking about it. It's like that. I can't describe who I am. If I try to, I lose it. So work has been, in a sense, been the answer. So my day is bookended with looking after myself and enjoying all of the wonderful things that the world has to offer. But in between, it's obligations. And I get to do all sorts of things in my work life and in my home life. And whether my other half, God bless him, has never folded a garment in his life. I've been folding his clothes for 20 years. And when he wants something, he takes all the clothes and he throws them onto the bed, picks his one garment, and then disappears. No one knows where he goes. So sometimes I realise I refolded the same tracksuit bottom 12 times that week. It's fine. And then a few months ago, I was involved in a case by the International Criminal Court against Russia. So I do fancy stuff and I do laundry. I don't care. If I just do laundry, fine by me. And that's the real freedom, the freedom of serving God rather than serving myself, rather than pursuing the dysfunctional use of work to mask the problems which I should have been addressing with the programme, using work as a way to build up the person that I'm meant to be in the planet. And it's not the work that matters, it's the doing it for the higher power. That seems to be what gives it its real substance. And we've got some questions. Very good. Is there one that appeals to you?
Well, we could start with this one. So I was recently informed by the company that sacked me, we deny discrimination. Shall I proceed to tribunal or leave it? I feel scared, lol. It does say lol. What's the line? Should I forgive or should I sue? Well, first you forgive and then you sue, maybe. So whether, you ask your higher power what the right thing to do is, what are the principles involved, approach the situation rationally and reasonably, to speak to some adults, speak to some experts, outside help includes employment lawyers, have an informal conversation, decisions made on emotion. You're not going to, I don't know when I'm making a decision based coming from an emotional place, I'm not very confident in how right that action is. So there's a whole bunch, I don't know the answer to the question specifically, but getting to peace first and then seeking expert advice, and focusing on your moral conduct, that's what I would approach it from the position of.
My first sponsor reported to me that he was a doctor, reported to me that he'd read an article which looked at how quickly people's bones healed after suffering bone fractures in accidents, comparing cohort 1, the people that sued, and cohort 2, the people that didn't. and the people that didn't, the bones healed quicker. That's not advice. I'm just reporting what he read, and I don't know how good the study design was. I had a situation over 20 years ago where I was, this technical term for this? I was screwed out of several £1,000s, that's the technical term, by an employer. And I had a very strong case. But the thing about what they refer to as toxic relationships is when you leave one, it sort of extends tendrils to try to get you back in there. And I realised that the temptation to sue them was, I was attracted to that in part so that I could, as it were, mend my wounded self-esteem, restore my reputation in the eyes of people I did not even respect or care about, and prove them wrong. And those were not good motivations for me. I got out and it was a very clean break, and I'm so glad. Now, that's not advice. I don't care what anyone else does, and every situation is different. But it also says in the big book, we cease fighting anything or anyone. And I do much better, generally, when I adopt that approach. Do you want to pick another one?
Yeah. Okay, so this feels like maybe it's a two-parter, but okay, so recommendations for untangling one's identity from the status achieved at work. Well, I mean, I don't know exactly. I mean, things that have been helpful for me is, so firstly, so far in gaining status at work, how's that felt? Has that felt good? Has that left me peaceful, joyous, connected? So if all my experience so far has shown me that, and also vulnerable, right? So people can do all sorts of things could happen. There could be a solar flare tomorrow. There could be a war somewhere that could impact my job. The work, there's sort of a roll of the die or a Russian roulette every day. So my experience so far in making getting this identity from work, it's far better to lean on the idea that my identity is a child of a loving God. It doesn't depend on what other people think of me. It doesn't depend on how my day is going. It doesn't depend on my earning prospects. Something that specifically because I've thought recently, because I've been unwell. What if this doesn't improve for months or years? I might not be able to work full time. I might not be able to do the level of skilled things that I can do. So maybe I'll have to take a sort of take a step down in responsibilities and stuff. And then the thought comes, I'm like, what a relief would that be? And also there are way more other important things than work. So I think the idea can be dismantled quite a bit from my own experience so far.
What I can do is repeat to myself, I'm a perfect child of God, they're a perfect child of God. I am nothing else than that. There's someone in East London AA that says we're just all stardust, which is a bit sentimental, but very good. And tradition 6, not lending one's name to anything outside. My work is what I do. It's not the substance of my work is not who I am. It's a thing that I'm doing. My ultimate substance is spirit. There's a question here. I can't read all the words, but if the person doesn't mind, I'll rephrase what I understand the question to be. In a work environment where one is providing care to others, the question is, when you have to set boundaries to look after yourself because you can't give 100, you can't give 140%. That's you just don't care about the people we're caring for, and now. I recognise I'm not in a care providing environment, but I recognise the flavour, and the flavour, because I used to work in the city, and the flavour is you have to sell your soul to the organisation. You're not allowed weekends. You're not allowed if you go home at a certain time, you're a lightweight. If you leave at 5:00 one day, some joker says take an half day. made to feel guilty if you have to have a doctor's appointment or other stuff. To go back to the point on intimate relationships, Don P. saying, I don't know how to have a healthy sick relationship. I don't know how to have a healthy relationship with an unpleasant organisation. And I work mostly for agencies, and I've got 30 or 40 agencies that I'm, as it were, sort of certified to work with. I'm on their books. But honestly, there are about 7 or 8 of them that I'm really prepared to work for, and I've got them tiered into 4 tiers. There are agencies where I'll bend over backwards for them because I've got good relationships with the individual people who are working there. So I will bend over backwards for them, and they bend over backwards for me because they recognise, good craftsmen recognise each other. There's agencies which are fine, and I'll prioritise them, but I won't break my back for them. There are agencies, if I literally have nothing else to do, I will work for them, but the Al-Anon shields go straight up, and there are agencies that I won't touch with a barge pole. And what I've noticed with working with organisations, if one area is unpleasant or incompetent, the whole organisation, you're learning something about the DNA of the organisation. And the Al-Anon thing, the Al-Anon blind spot is, it was probably an anomaly. So I'm going to give them another chance. I'm going to give them another chance. Because I'm so frightened that God won't bring me something better. I put up with really shit organisations and really shit behaviour, people that don't respect you as a person. So I've learned in AA to be very careful who I associate with. I've learned with work to be very careful who I associate with. And the body doesn't lie. So my physical reaction to the organisation will, like when the email comes in, if I'm like, yay, this is good. If my body tenses up before I've even read it, there is a problem here. And what I've learnt to do is to say, no thank you, and then not think about it again, not feel guilty that I'm saying no. And if it means that there is no work for a while, fuck it, I don't care. I would rather have a self-respecting life than work for arseholes. That's just me. God seems to give me stuff to do. When I let go and I'm willing to work, God gives me stuff to do.
How do you plan for the future in self-employment whilst also taking it one day at a time? So, again, this is another way that the traditions are incredibly helpful. So through the traditions you get to Bill's essay on leadership, and he makes a very, very nice point, like living one day at a time is about really with reference to our emotional lives. So the emotional life of the day. This is not, he uses the phrase, not to leave the future to some kind of providence. So we don't leave the future entirely to God. He's giving us the capacity to plan and so on. So you can live one at a time and have plans. That's okay. But it's the planning is an activity that might be part of my day. And through work, I currently have a situation where we work in 2-week blocks. At the beginning of the block, we say what we're intending to do for the coming 2 weeks. At the end of the 2-week period, we review what we've done. And then we have a bigger structure where we review things quarterly. And I haven't quite implemented that across the entirety of my life, but for my working life, we take time out to plan and crucially to review how things have gone. And then we just get on with the things that are planned to do, adjusting if there's an emergency or something's urgent. So they're not, I don't think, in conflict. You can plan, but still live one at a time.
So for a number of years, I was chiefly employed. For many years now, I've been chiefly self-employed. I have an employer as well for a few things. And it was so interesting. When I was misusing my work life, I was massively overspending and always in debt because I needed to spend to reward myself for the fact I had a job that I essentially hated but was doing for ego reasons. And when I had the little breakdown, I switched and asked God what I should do instead. and some ideas immediately started to flood in. It's as though the ideas had been there the whole time, but I'd been blind to them. So I don't know what to do. Maybe I'm blocking myself when I'm in that situation. The answer has been there all along. Anyway, what it would entail was studying again, and I'd need money to get me through that. What it also needed was enough of a cash float to get me through the first few months, because you're not going to hit the ground running with new clients. You're not going to get paid straight away. And I went from, and some opportunities came in to do some temporary work. And I went from being in debt to having enough money to cover me for all of those eventualities in a year and a bit, and it was almost no effort required whatsoever, because my whole intentional framework had changed, and I no longer wanted to spend money to fix myself, because there was a higher purpose that was being sought. Very, very curious. My relationship with money, I could not fix it until the work situation was put on the right track. The money thing sorted itself out. A couple of principles I observe with finances. In step 4, we have a fact-finding and a fact-facing exercise. And what I was advised to do about 25 years ago by a sponsor was to write down literally every penny that I spend, reconcile the cash once a week, reconcile the bank once a month, so that I know I'm catching every penny. And then look at, categorize the amounts and ask myself once a month, what value am I getting out of the money that I'm spending? And the horror of looking at the crap that my money was going on, which was producing no goodness in my life whatsoever. 98% of those spending problems actually came from not being able to face the truth of what I was doing. All I needed to do really was to look at the truth, and the truth directed me on the right path. Other principles, tradition 7, to be fully self-supporting through my own contributions. So I don't consider I have a career. I have a livelihood. It's my job to cover myself. And in the concept as well, to have a prudent reserve of 2 years of operating expenses. Now, at call, so that if I was unemployed and stayed unemployed for 2 years, I'd be able to cover my costs without breaking my stride. And I'm in that position, but I'm in that position not because I earn a particularly large amount of money, but because I set that as the intention. And over the years, my spending has been so careful, it actually became easy to be in that position. When COVID hit, my industry collapsed by about 85% was just wiped. A lot of it has come back, but it was wiped. And now it turned out I was actually all right through that. But I didn't have any fear, because I knew, well, I've got 2 years of operating expenses. What I've had to learn in AA, I can only choose between the available options. I can't have financial security and spend whatever I want to spend on whatever I want to spend it on. I've got to pick what's important. For me, financial security, it's all very well, God will remove our financial insecurity, but it really helps to have some financial security as well. And the reason why it's helpful is because I never worry about money. I just don't need to think about it. And that frees up my consciousness to do what's really important in life. It's not because the money is important, it's because it's unimportant that it needs to be dealt with.
How do I know if I'm becoming a workaholic as a substitute addiction when in recovery? So I qualify for Workaholics Anonymous, Under Earners Anonymous, Debtors Anonymous, Business Debtors Anonymous, Procrastinators Anonymous, and a dozen other things. I've treated all those things. I'm in AA, I'm in Al-Anon. I've been to those other fellowships, and the answer was the same. I needed to work the steps and go to God and ask for the strength there. It was helpful to talk to other people who have had similar problems, but all these work problems I can find with people in AA and Al-Anon, and I can always go to those other fellowships if I needed to find someone to work with. But, and I'm not sure exactly about the definition of a workaholic from like the Workaholics Anonymous sense. Here's a good question around anything in my life. Is the behaviour compulsive and immoderate. So do I find myself working when I shouldn't be working? I wasn't planning to work. Do I find myself working when there are other more important things or better things I should be doing? Do I go off on sprees of working? Like there's something important that needs to be dealt with. Do I dip in, fix the problem and get back on with my life, or do I disappear into my emails for 2 days? So, and I'm not sure about the definitions of any of these things. What's the difference between a step 1 problem and a step 6 and 7 problem? Fundamentally, I was actually almost derailed in terms of dealing with my work problems, and in fact, I would have dealt with them quicker had I simply brought them to the programme and got honest with my sponsor and the existing people around me. I almost got derailed by starting from scratch again with a fresh process in a fresh fellowship, and your mileage might vary. I was brought back from that because I realised at some point the behaviour is going to have to stop. I'm going to have to stop doing the things I shouldn't be doing and start doing the things I should be doing. So I don't know what the definition is, but yeah.
A couple of points, and then we'll finish up. A very good catch-all definition of an addiction, which covers everything, is a persistent return to a destructive pattern. If it's a pattern, so it's not just once or twice, it keeps happening, and it's destructive, and I return to it, not just once, but persistently, a persistent return to a destructive pattern. And for me, it fits every single addiction and addictive or compulsive behaviour. That's my test, and it's pretty straightforward once you've got that definition. A couple of other points, and this is non-conference approved literature. Practicing the presence of God by Brother Lawrence completely transformed my attitude to work, so that I'm working for God, not for other people, as far as I'm concerned, and treating each action as being for God. And just the last thing, my Al-Anon go-to person, he's not my sponsor, I have one sponsor, but on some Al-Anon stuff I'll go to Tom, and I sent him these incredibly long messages. Well, I used to send him these incredibly long messages, and he'd write back 2 days later with one word like breathe or stop it. And I asked him about work once. There was this very complex question, and he said the answer to the whole thing. He said, work is important, but people are more important. So that's all the time we have, I'm afraid. The remaining session today is service as a way of life. And if that doesn't fill the room, I don't know what will. So let's close with the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.